and welcome once again to another campaign diary and Q&A for the Manylands campaign, which is a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition setting that I've created myself and that the players have been playing through over the last couple of months here on the channel. If you have missed any of the most recent episodes, you can find those on the Twitch channel, so that will be sessions 9 and 10. You want to pull in double figures, which should still be on the channel for the next few days. But you can find all of the previous episodes from the very, very beginning, including character creation, all the way back. That's session 1. It's all in our archive, which is all on our YouTube channel. It's at slice&d6 or slice&dice. Look that up on YouTube. You should find us no problem at all. So you can sit back and relax and enjoy all of the events so far to get caught up. So, speaking of catching up, I've got quite a few episodes to catch up on, as we haven't done a campaign diary for over a month. So it means I've got 4 sessions to catch up on. That's 7, 8, 9, and 10, which is quite nice actually to have a roundup of all those episodes, because there was a kind of, at least with 7, 8, and 9, a bit of a trend. Which is kind of the first topic I wanted to talk about today. I've got my trusty notebook with me, which I keep track of some of the most noteworthy events that have happened in each session, especially stuff that maybe the players aren't aware of just yet, but that I am aware of and need to keep a log of for future sessions. So session 7 was finally, after a couple of weeks of build-up, the group finally confronted the basilisk. Now, this whole situation with the basilisk came about because originally James, who plays Seth, wanted to find out. He wanted his character to. He wanted Seth to be a monster hunter, and he wanted to sort of find some interesting monsters that he could fight against. And I was discussing with him about what would be a good one to start off with, to kind of lead him into the campaign. And he wanted something that was relatively low level, but still a bit of a challenge. And Basilisk came up, and I thought, I know what Basilisk is. Perfect, nice mythological being. Let's do something with that. So I already had that in. So after having that discussion, already had that in mind. But also, I was aware that the main narrative thread that had been given to the players at this time was tracking down the missing ambassador. That's Lady Helene Grenforth. Now that came about because actually I kind of gave that to DK and to his character Malar before the first session, because I realised he as well needed an impetus. Dan had designed this Loxodon cleric, was a man of the cloth, was very respectable and so on, and we kind of devised between the two of us how to get that character into adventuring, and it makes sense because of how he behaves, how Malar behaves, and how he interacts with the world, that he was kind of forced into it. And basically the premise for him arriving at Flaming Jack's Bar and Grill, which is where Seth meets him in session 1, go check that out, he's there because he's supposed to be meeting the Lady Helene. He's supposed to be an ambassador for the kind of he's supposed to accompany the ambassador as a kind of advisor and as a representation of the Eight, to show goodwill from the Burikrin converted to the Lady Helene, who's come from the neighbouring the Crowflies, and House Grenforth, of which Lady Helene is from, particularly gets on very well with Burikrin, have very good relations. So by bringing a man of the cloth over, one of the Burikrin converted, a deacon no less, to accompany him on their travels, seemed like a good gesture. And for Malar's superior, it was also a way of kind of getting quite a socially awkward and reclusive character out of their shell, and more importantly, out of their superior's immediate sight, which I think they needed a break from Malar's ways for quite some time. He can be quite laborious to talk to, being somewhat dull, by his own admission. So I decided that the two of these things, I wanted to kind of combine them together to thread those two plot hooks, those two plot lines together, so that it then means that Seth and Malar then have a shared goal. And so that was the whole reason why Lady Helene is, in fact, it turns out, has been petrified by a basilisk and then has been abducted. We're not quite sure who, but it seems to be pointing at one of the other houses from the Crowflies. We can find out more about that by rewatching sessions 7 and 8. But anyway, so session 7 was this, finally, after a lot of build-up, our first kind of big boss fight for the group. Because so far, the group had fought minions, and they'd fought a couple of interesting characters, but no particular stereotypical boss fight. So after all this build-up, it was nice to have this basilisk fight. And so for that, because it was the lair of the basilisk, I put in, as well as the normal basilisk stats, I put in lair actions. Just to keep things interesting, and certainly it kept the party guessing. It knocked the Oberyn out twice through lair actions, so it really changes the encounter. In hindsight, although I had planned out that the basilisk encounter was going to happen, it was inevitable. Actually, in hindsight, if I was to do it again, I would probably make the basilisk more mobile. The main effect that worries people with the basilisk is its deadly gaze, the petrifying gaze, and that gets somewhat nerfed when you're in a large open space and have the fight on your hands, because the characters, after the first initial sort of surprise from the basilisk kind of coming out of the shadows, as it did to Seth and nearly turned him to stone, after that, once they know where it is, they just avert their eyes, and the players will say, "Oh, I avert my eyes," which just means they have disadvantage on all their attacks and so on. So while it's static, it's not as deadly. And actually, the kind of twisting, turning corridor and cave system which they had come through to get to this main point was actually would be a lot more deadly for the party, because as soon as they lose sight of the basilisk, so to speak, as soon as the basilisk is out of their sight range and they can look around, they don't know where to avert their eyes to, because they don't know where it's going to come from. And so if they explore in a particular direction, they turn a corner, bam, he's there, petrified. That makes it a much more deadly encounter. So I think in hindsight, I would probably change that up and have him roaming around. But the first 2 times he'd been roaming around in the cave, they quite sensibly retreated out, which then kind of left me needing to change things up a little bit. And by the 3rd time, I think, even though a basilisk is meant to be just a beast, a monstrosity, a creature of not a particularly high intelligence, even the dullest of minds notices patterns eventually and starts to not be baited by them, and that's kind of what happened with that. So that was kind of the boss fight that was planned. Then in session 8, we kind of had the optional, what turned out to be a boss fight. It wasn't really meant to be, but it just ended up kind of spilling into one. The random encounter boss fight, the random boss fight, and that was with the giant spider in another corridor. Now, I had written out that there was a giant spider that did kind of make its little lair, if you like, its home within one particular tunnel as part of that cave system, and the whole idea was that there was something in it for the party down there, because there was the corpse of one of the abductors, and in fact it was the one that had tried to find Turin after he managed to escape. So Tienin and Turin, if you didn't know, were the 2 dwarves of House Bluebeard of the Crowflies, who had been charged with being bodyguards to the Lady Helene. So they were meant to accompany her on her travels, and that's why their whole goal is to find her and get her back, and that's their main impetus, particularly for Tienin. Those 2 characters were not aware of this plot by these people dressed up as Bureaucran Republic guards to abduct the ambassador, and so they were kind of collateral damage. Tienin, being the smarter one of the 2, kind of realised what was going on a little bit too late, but he had enough time that he could help Turin escape from those guards, only for Turin himself to get trapped under some rocks and hide in another corridor, being that his sense of direction isn't that great anyway. While Tienin was turned to stone along with the ambassador. Now, they didn't actually need Tienin, so they left his petrified form behind in the cave, while the rest of them, it seems, escaped through the waterfall exit. And it seems they had this all planned out, which should have been heavily hinted at, because Brucom found so in the main chamber where the basilisk was, there was also two kind of alcoves, one either side of the entrance to that main chamber. And one of those had a load of crates inside, along with rope, grappling hooks, and so on. Basically, giving the impression that this was premeditated, that the group, the Republic Guard, had planned this all along. They'd set their stuff down inside that cave. They were aware there was a basilisk there. Somehow they managed to do that without getting caught with it. That's another story. And set the trap ready. And then once they had done what they needed to do, they could then take the petrified ambassador away without much of a struggle other than her weight, and retreat and go wherever they are going, which appears, as the characters pointed out in session 10, it appears to be they're heading towards the Crowflies, suggesting again that perhaps these people are from the Crowflies. So, the spider encounter was it was planned out that there was a spider lair, but it wasn't. I didn't realise until later on that actually turned into quite a big fight, and that's because I, on the fly, put in a lair action, and that was, rather than just having this one giant spider, the spider had its underlings, its little babies, these tiny little spiders, like we would find normal sized spiders, that then actually seemed to cause more problems than the giant spider itself did, because when you have 6 adventurers and one giant spider, even if they're all level 1, if they can all get into the fight with this thing, they can overwhelm it pretty quickly. Numbers play a huge role in encounters in Dungeons and Dragons. So even if you have more that have the numbers by 1, that one extra set of hands, set of feet, whatever, make a massive difference, and they can really shift, turn the tide in a battle situation, even against PCs. If you have one more NPC than PCs, then the players are going to find it a lot more challenging. Okay, bear with me 1 second. I'll be right back. I'm back. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, it turned into a boss fight without kind of meaning it to, but it's good to, I think as a DM, it's good to kind of have little encounters like that, just kind of tucked away somewhere, just so you can bring them out in the heat of the moment, and it made it kind of the centerpiece of session 8 of what was then called a Spider Chuff, because it ended up being a lot more important as an encounter than it otherwise should have been. It was meant to be kind of a side bit to the larger basilisk cave. So that was really fun. And it was then something, again, it was a bit of a challenge, but with the lair actions and having the spider kind of, the swarm of spiders getting on one of the players, that made things very interesting. But it was definitely it was the lowest challenge of the 3 boss fights that I'm going to talk about. The basilisk, although I accidentally made it slightly easier than it should have been, the lair actions more than made up for the lack of mobility on the basilisk, making it still quite a tough encounter for the group. And I think at least 2 or 3 of the players went down. Leobrin went down twice, but multiple. As soon as characters start falling down, that's when you know there's a bit of challenge to this, or they're just horrifically incompetent. But I don't think that any of the players in this campaign are incompetent. And if they're watching, you're doing great. Then after, so to finish off session 7, Teenin and Turin were then introduced, and Teenin's petrified stone form was found in the basilisk lair. And it was Fleeting Look who decided to use the last of the cockatrice balm to set Teenin free. And fortunately, although I don't think he was actually aware of this, the balm lasts for only a short amount of time, but also the petrification effect can only be treated by the balm within a certain time frame. So for me, so what I've decided basically in this campaign is that the cockatrice balm itself has a very short shelf life when it's created, but also that it has to be applied. I think I read this somewhere actually, that it has to be applied to a character that has been turned to stone, but it has to be within the first 24 hours of petrification. If it's any longer than that, it will have no effect. And then the only hope for a petrified character then is a spell of greater restoration or similar. I think is the only way to bring them back after that. So although the players haven't found this out yet, they may well do in future events and adventures. But fortunately, Fleeting Look applied this, and it was within the 24-hour window, so it brought Teenan back, and I really enjoyed playing Teenan and Turin. I can give you a little bit more information about them as we've got a little bit of time. So Teenan and Turin, the characters, I originally came up with these characters way back when I was, I think I was just entering my teens, and I wanted to write. I tried many times to write novels. I always got a few chapters in, and then I'd give up and I'd move on to the next thing. And Teenan and Turin first came about when I basically tried to do my own kind of almost a rip-off of the Lord of the Rings, and Teenan and Turin just came out of that as a couple of characters that were interesting. So I had the main kind of fellowship. Teenan and Turin were not part of that fellowship. They were part of just the guard of dwarves, which were employed to then go along with the main group. They were kind of side characters. But I really like the dynamic between them, having the one very grumpy but intelligent and wise brother, and then having the very affable but slightly dense brother. So Teenan would be the smart one, but the grumpy grandson, just not the most pleasant individual. Like, he has a laugh, but normally it's other people's expense. Other than that, he's quite grouchy. Whereas Turin is meant to be more earnest. He's meant to be a lot more likable and not believable, but he's a lot more he's a lot more an enjoyer of the simple things, a meat and potatoes kind of guy, but also a very jovial and up for a good time. But he is maybe slightly naive and is easily taken in by others, and they have their faults. And I felt like out of all the characters they created, because these two weren't really plagiarizing anything, they seemed to stand out for me even then. So then I tried writing a novel with those two as the main characters, and in fact with that one I managed to get maybe 9 chapters in before I eventually gave up with it. But they're two characters that as I was creating the Manylands campaign, they just kind of came to mind, and I thought, actually, I was trying to come up with different houses for the Crowflies, as it's meant to be a feudal society. There's a bit of the Game of Thrones about it, that feudal medieval feel, and so I wanted to have established some coats of arms and things like that, and I knew that some of the houses in the Crowflies would be dwarven houses, and suddenly I just remembered about these two characters. I thought, great, let's bring them into the mix. These because I've already created them. I already have those characters there, like just way back in the bank of mind. Let's bring them back and use them for that. And I think actually it's been really fun to have them interacting with the group and having, as twin brothers as well, kind of play off against each other, but also play the group off against each other as well. And I think Teenan is a great example. I think when you're creating NPCs, it's very easy to come up with a character that fulfills a need for the group. So somebody that's going to kind of get them from A to B, for instance, like the party need to stay somewhere for the night. I'll create a tavern, and there's a tavern keeper who's willing to give them a room. What is quite rewarding, but a lot more difficult to do, is to create a character that can give the party what they need, but isn't very willing to give them what they need, and to be almost a bit of a douche. It's quite fun to play without being just overtly bad for the sake of it. Just being a character who isn't particularly fond of the party and quite suspicious of them, and I would say maybe belligerent and cantankerous. And I think Teenan kind of fills that role for me. I think that's a really fun, different way of approaching NPCs. So if you haven't done so before and you want to think about DMing, think about putting in a slightly less cooperative NPC, an important but less cooperative one. So not an out and out bad guy, not somebody who's out to thwart the party and destroy them, but somebody who is an unwilling ally, I guess. I think something is mentioned in the in Xanathar's Guide to Everything about rivals. I'd say that rivals probably the closest thing. Hi Edwin, thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I'd say that the rivals probably the closest to what I'm kind of doing with Teenan. So I think that works quite well, and that was definitely good fun, and it's kind of rewarding to see the party responding to it. So initially they don't really like him. Seth in particular is like, I'm going to kill him. I can't stand him, because they kind of rub each other off up the wrong way, and it's really fun to watch that relationship develop, that rivalry. And then you've got Malar, DK's character, who then approached it a bit differently. Tried to talk to this guy on his level, figure out where he's coming from, and they've kind of got an understanding, not a friendship, but an understanding. And that's again quite interesting that they have these different relationships with the characters. Not to mention Fleeting Look, of course, who actually brought Teenan back by using the balm in the first place, and then told Teenan about Seth torturing his brother Turin, which he kind of did. He kind of made Turin's knee injury worse for his own ends. So that wasn't entirely false, but it was it fueled that kind of rivalry from the start. So it's been really fun to do. So I think that kind of wraps up on session 7. Actually, no, there is one last thing in session 7, and that was, so again, another thing that's kind of overlooked in the general geography of the world. When I was looking through the spell list for, I can't remember why, but I was looking at the cleric spell list. I remember why now. So one of the items within the cave, which Neris I think found in session 8, was a scroll, and it was meant to be a scroll with a cleric spell. And I was looking through it, I was like, which cleric spell am I going to use for this? I ended up using Meld into Stone, which the rest of the party don't know. DK does know, because he has actually been given the scroll now. So Malar has the scroll, which is great, because it's the only character who can use it, and now has it, so great. But anyway, one of the spells I found was Purify Food and Drink. And that's a spell I've never seen anyone use it, because in most games of D&D that I've played, it's been more about session by session, and they'd kind of skip through the travel and exploration part, and it'd be more about the encounters. They wouldn't include the bits in the middle. So Purify Food and Drink almost kind of gets pushed to one side, unless it's for a very specific use. It's kind of put on the shelf. So that kind of got me thinking. Was that about using supplies and things like that. So that's why I'm quite rigorous in this campaign at the moment. When the group are traveling somewhere and it's going to take them the best part of the day, they have to consume one of their rations, or else they have to go hunting and foraging. If they don't do that, they have to take a day's worth of rations off of their list, and eventually they'll run out, and then that can cause exhaustion and things like that. And equally, they have to drink from their water skin, which means that if they do travel and it takes the most part of the day, they're going to use up the entirety of their water skin, so they have to make sure they refill it, just to get them planning and to have that part of adventuring I've yet to see explored in a game. So I thought it'd be really nice to bring that in and just see how that works. And I think although it can slow down the pace a bit and make things a bit grindy sometimes, I think it adds an extra level for the players, for their thinking, but also it kind of adds a bit more to the role play and the kind of discussion side of things. And one of the things that's been really nice in this campaign is seeing so the players as the characters just kind of getting to know each other, kind of establish what their roles are within the group, and that is quite fluid, and it does change depending on the situation. And yeah, I think that works really well. Why am I telling you this? Well, it's because in the Basilisk Lair, where there is a secret exit out of it, which was a waterfall covering a kind of opening in the cave wall. And below the waterfall, of course, is a pool of water. Two of the characters, which was Neris and Leobrin, decided to refill their water skins from the pool there. Now, a pool in a cave, it's going to be full of bacteria. I did note to the players that it was kind of a greenish colour, There were small sort of fish and things, insects floating in the water, or swimming in the water, in there, just bits and pieces, just, not the most sanitary stuff. But they filled their water skins from them, which aren't magical water skins, just perfectly normal ones. So I noted that I made a note and then brought it up, I think in session 9, that you're going to have to make a Constitution save if you drink these straight away. I think they both passed, but it was if they'd failed, they would have got poisoned essentially. Again, it's just another thing. It's not it's almost like a natural trap. It's not as elaborate or as exciting as a trap, but it still adds a little something to it, because if they drank that murky water and they got poisoned, things could have got a lot worse for them in the next encounter. They could got stomach upset, things like that. There's all kinds of potential with that. So look at the environment, look at the geography of the world, of the map that you're building, and just have a think about little things like that make perfect sense. Because why would you drink water that's like pooling inside a cave? Like, why would you think, that looks perfectly healthy, I'll drink that? No. If they had said, we're going to gather up some of this water and then we're going to boil it, okay, you're going to get rid of some of the impurities, like that makes total sense. That's a natural, that's a good logical thing to do. And hence, if I think I was role playing Neris in that session anyway, so I made her do that to say, that will help, that will make it a lot more palatable. So another thing to think about. So anyway, session 8. The main part, as I said, was the fight with the spiders, and then they ended up fighting stumbling into the encounter with the swarm of bats and Bat's lair. Again, I kind of planned this out already where the zones were, but they managed to. I think Leobrin, being covered in spiders, wanted to move away from everyone else so he could use his Arms of Hadar spell, which we've now kind of adapted because Leobrin's is a warlock, but his patron is the Archfey, so we kind of wanted to make it a bit more a bit more natural, shall we say, a bit more Feywild-esque. So it's now Arms of the Feywild, just so it's rather than the tentacles coming out, it's going to be vines and that kind of flora coming out and grabbing enemies, because it just a little bit of flavor just kind of makes sense for the character. So he wanted to use that, so he wanted to get clear of the group to use it on these spiders, but he ended up stumbling into a lair of bats instead, and it was very funny, but also makes a bit of a made it quite an interesting encounter, because it ended up being one big encounter rather than two separate ones, and that's perfectly fine, and it's good fun to have. So I think that was the main point of session 8. One other thing which I think the players may have missed actually since then was that on the corpse of the guard that, as I said earlier, had been looking for Turin. So they found out that he was from a house from the Crowflies, and in fact it was a member of House Ash, as Teenan reckoned. And House Ash is a vassal house of House Rookwood. If I'm probably just saying words at you right now, but basically the Crowflies is made up of 3 major houses. These are I've called them the liege houses. They are the Grenforths, the Rookwoods, and Bronn. So House Rookwood, House Grenforth, House Bronn are the 3 main houses, and all the other houses within the Crowflies then serve one of those 3 main houses. They're kind of like the barons, and then you have the nobles underneath them who serve the barons. That's kind of the relationship. So House Ash is a vassal of House Rookwood, and they find in session 9 another corpse, and this one of a wizard who I can't remember if they found out, but anyway, it's from they do from House Ravenburg, which again is a vassal house of House Rookwood. So again, there's a bit of a theme there, but I think what the players missed was the hexagonal coins, which are Crowflies marks, which Neris picked up from the first one. I think they may have forgotten about that, but currency, another little thing which I didn't really think about at first, but because the Manylands, as the name suggests, has a lot of different countries and nations, it would make sense that some of these different countries would have their own currencies. It wouldn't all just be gold, silver, and copper just to make things easy. No, there'd be different kinds of currency, and there'd be an exchange rate and things like that. So maybe a bit too analytical, maybe going a bit deep on this, but it's a nice little flavor thing, and I used this earlier on. I think in when the group liberated the Stonebreaker, the sort of siege equipment from Half-Reach, because then they found some Isken pentacles. That kind of you come up with, okay. So for your campaign, Edwin, you came up with a way to have a universal currency. Fair enough. If that works for your game, that's cool. Why I use different currencies was kind of as a nod and a kind of a hint almost that some of these characters that they're coming across aren't from around here, to make you think that there's something bigger going on. So as I was saying with the Stonebreaker, when it got liberated, the guards of the complex which the Stonebreaker was in, I made it quite clear that they were not Burekrin regulars. These guys were from somewhere else. It turns out they were from Isk, and the concrete proof of that was the fact that they were gambling with Isken pentacles, which isn't a currency that you'd find in Burekrin. Burekrin use the Burekrin pieces, which are the standard gold, silver, and copper. Because if we're going to start there, let's just use that as the base. So that was kind of a big hint that these guys were from somewhere else, and kind of caused some suspicion. Not because you should be suspicious of your neighbours, but because they were using their own currency rather than using the currency of the nation they were in. Makes them seem like they haven't been there that long. They're not meant to be there for a long time. Just adds a layer to it, I thought, and massively with the two corpses that they come across. These two. Guys these two guards disguised as members of the Burekrin Republic Guard. The fact that they have crowflies marks on them shows that they are most certainly not from round here, as they say, and they're clearly not the guards that they appear to be. So that was kind of what I brought that in for. And I just thought it'd be nice to create your own currencies. Again, it's a thing I've never done before, so I thought, let's try it and see how it works. If you've got a universal currency for your campaign, fair enough. If that works for your campaign, do it. It's certainly a lot simpler. But I would say, if you ever thought about trying a different currency for a place, give it a go. I don't see there's any harm in it, as long as you've written it down how you exchange back to the first currency you've got. You won't have a problem, and it just adds a bit of flavour and a bit of intrigue to the campaign. So why not? So yeah, that was session 8. Was kind of finishing off that cave complex. So they found the giant spider. They stumbled across the bats. Once they dealt with those, I think they kind of said, let's call it a day there. We've got other priorities right now. We're getting sidetracked, despite the large diamond which I had noted to them, which was embedded in one of the walls inside a particular alcove of the cave. They've made a note of that. They're pretty sure they're going to go back to that at some point and try and squeeze that out. Because you want to give them reason to revisit places. Oh, you have so Edwin, you have different cultures and different cultures that use different counting systems. Interesting. Okay, yeah, I like that. That's cool. Again, I think I'll probably be implementing that myself, which will become much more apparent to the group when they end up traveling to a different nation within the campaign. Currently, I think it's very much Burekrin faced, and at low levels, I want to keep it that way, just because I think they need to get familiar with the general makeup of the land, but also because of how the storyline's going. You want to keep it quite small when they're at low levels, and then as their reputation grows and as their power grows, then they can branch off and go to other places and really expand their fame and also their skill set. So anyway, session 9, they finally left the cave, and session 9 had the final boss battle that I'm going to talk about. And this last boss battle is, I guess I would call the teaser boss battle. Basically, it's one that is deliberately set so that the characters at their current level will find it very, very, very hard to beat. Nigh on impossible to beat. And the reason for that is because, one, it's something that may come about later on. It's like a little nod to the future. They come. It's an encounter that they're going to remember because they lost or they had to flee, so they didn't win the battle. So they're going to remember that and try and learn from that. As I said, it nods to things in the future because they may want to come back later and try and defeat them when they're a bit more powerful. Kind of like, to use an analogy from if you've ever played the original Pokemon games, like Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Yellow, all that stuff. When you get to the first city, you could then branch off from there and go down towards Indigo Plateau, which is where you'd go towards the end of the game to face the Elite Four, who are like the final the final kind of big bad you meant to fight. If you go there really early, you're going to really struggle, and you can't actually get in, I think, when you get to the building, but it's a struggle before you get there as well. It's to remind you that you've got some way to go. You've got some growing to do. I think that's important, but also because also for plot reasons, they come across something that's very hard now because they may well have to go back there later on for a particular item or something else within the campaign, and kind of wanted to give them a little taster of that. It's maybe something that's way off in the future, but just to give them that little breadcrumb that they can pick up later on. So the encounter I'm talking about, the boss battle in this, was they fought this stone guardian that basically got the jump on them because it blends in with the rocks, and they were exploring a mountainous region. It was kind of between the foothills and the mountainside. Sorry, Edwin says, dwarves, for example, use base 5 instead of base 10 in my world. Yeah, interesting. I like it. Okay, cool. Anyway, so blending in with the mountainside, the Stone Guardian, essentially I used the base of the, in case the players are watching and they're interested in this, I used the base of the Galeb Dur, which is like this rocky being. It's made entirely of rocks, like an elemental. It can control other rocks as well, which reminded me, if you ever watched the film Labyrinth, of Ludo, the kind of big troll thing that can control rocks. I thought that was a really nice mechanic, and it really worked because it's basically the Galeb Dur can animate 2 boulders, essentially which essentially means you're fighting 3 Galeb Durs, because they all have the same abilities and the same hit points. So it can make a very difficult encounter, and for these guys it made it very, very hard. But again, they fought valiantly, but they couldn't overcome this odds, and so they had to use other tactics. That's another reason to occasionally have not. You want to test your players with encounters, but sometimes you want to kind of push that. You want to push it slightly over the edge because you want to sometimes just give them that reminder that they are not world beaters yet. They're not gods. They will lose fights occasionally, and they have to be able to accept that, and also recognize when they're losing and change their tactics. And that's exactly what they did. Marshall, playing his character Leobrin, realized we need to try something else here. So we tried kind of negotiating and basically said, "Yep, we'll leave. If you stop attacking us, we'll leave quicker," by just negotiating that way. And so the Galeb Dur, or should I say the Stone Guardian in this, as it reveals to the group after seeing Malar's sort of talisman of the 8, which he carries on him, his holy symbol, recognizes that they follow the 8, and this Stone Guardian was created by one of the members of the 8, so they believe, and said they're waiting for their lady to return. This was hinting at quite overtly at one of the 4 goddesses. So the Great 8, which are the kind of pantheon that I've created for this campaign, there are 8 gods that are part of the 8. There are other religions, but the Great 8 are the main religion, the one that's mainly practiced throughout the Manylands. And of the 8, 4 are male, 4 are female. And I revealed in session 9 who the 4 female ones were, because Malar, being a deacon himself and of the cloth, would already know that. So it's kind of good to get that out there for the group and get their thinking caps on and allude to what may happen later. So if this being was created by one of the gods, what's it there for? What's it guarding? Why is it there? Why will it not let them pass? Why did it want to know who had sent them? Things like that. So it's all little tidbits, little breadcrumbs for them to pick up later on. Something just to note, just to go with all the other things that I've been throwing at them. I've realised recently there's quite a few different plot hooks that have been thrown down for them, and they're now kind of sifting through them, going, which one do we do? Which one do we do? Almost like looking at a menu with 100 items and just going blind because there was too much choice. Almost feel like that's going to happen. So I'm kind of pulling back in the most recent session just to kind of let's let them work with what they've got. We don't need to give them any more for now. So yeah, at the end of session 9, the trail, after encountering the Stone Guardian and leaving, the trail ends up leading them all the way back to basically where they started, or at least where Seth and Malar started, which is at Flaming Jack's Bar and Grill, the starter pub. Because you've got to love, you start in a tavern, classic. So they've ended up going full circle and going back there. And I had hinted at it before they left, but since the situation has brought them back there, they then now have this little quest for them to do, basically exploring underneath the rats that have got into the cellar of the tavern. It turns out rats have come from a much larger cavern complex. Another cave, I know, but this one's different to the last, a different build and different reason for being. So these rats have been coming out, and the party have been asked to do it. Now, originally they were going to get paid to sort out the rat problem, but since then, since they've gone off on a tangent and stolen a massive stonebreaker, basically a battering ram that's designed to break into mines and break up rocks and that sort of thing, hence stonebreaker. Since they've stolen that, and since Seth at the very beginning, because at the very, very beginning of the campaign, I introduced Seth as the first character and had him basically under arrest in a kind of almost a mock Skyrim kind of way, that he was there taking in some information whilst under restraint, and then the situation happens and he manages to escape. Nice little intro for a rogue character, so yeah. So anyway, he's in trouble for that, it would seem. He is basically a fugitive, exactly so, because he escaped from prison. Explain this to James during session, like, you are an escaped prisoner. Of course, they're looking for you. That's how this works. That's how it would work. There's no world I know of where if you escape from prison, you're just like, no, it's fine. Apart from maybe in Skyrim or Oblivion, but that's another story. So that plus stealing the Stonebreaker means the entire group are kind of got targets on their backs. They're wanted right now, although description of them may be a bit sketchy, meaning that it may be difficult to track them down necessarily. But they have a couple of characters that do stick out as well. You've got Malar the Loxodon, so the Elephant Man, and a turquoise tiefling, Fleeting Look. As well as Neris, the high elf with this whitish hair, red eyes, and constantly burning things. They're quite a colourful group, so they probably would stand out from the crowd. So they're going to have to watch their backs going forward and try and mitigate circumstances. It would seem that the guard are interested in reclaiming this Stonebreaker. I think more so than actually arresting these guys. Also, given the background of the world currently in the world at large, within Burikrin, they don't have a lot of forces to spare, a lot of guards to spare, because most of their forces have been taken to the border between Burikrin and the Dragonborn kingdom of Richir, as they're in kind of a bit of a cold war. No, in fact, they are very much in a cold war. Across the border, they're kind of competing above and below ground for control of the mountains. So a lot of their resources are there. So the Republic Guard really don't have a lot of time and resource to spare. to be tracking down some delinquents who've stolen a battering ram. So really, they're only after getting the battering ram back. I think once they've got that, they're not going to be that interested in the group, because that's their crime has then been cancelled out essentially. But Seth, on the other hand, he is a wanted man. He's escaped from prison. Wanted half-elf, should I say. Easily recognisable with a tricorn hat and a scarf, both of which he's currently abandoned, and probably was wise to do so. So with those targets on their backs, the proprietor of Flaming Jacks, that's Jackman Candlecorn Winklebottom. Yes, hello. He is. He has manipulated the situation to his advantage, because he is just that sort of guy. From the very start, he's crafty, very intelligent, and probably too intelligent for his own good, being quite mischievous, being that he is a gnome himself. So characteristically mischievous, intelligent. I think the two can sometimes go hand in hand. It's almost through boredom that you start to cause trouble. So he's a shrewd businessman, and has recognised, I need to get rid of rats, and these guys need to not be caught. Maybe we can make something work here. So he's basically got the group to look into to explore this where these rats have come from, and it hasn't had to pay out for it. So it solves his rat problem, meaning that the health and safety is not going to close down the inn, and also means that the group. It also means he's got more patrons who can order drinks and food and stuff. He's let them stay for free, so it's just a free bed for the night, and he gets his rat problem taken care of. So it's a win-win for him, really. Then we had session 10, which was the start of this, essentially. And because we only had 3 out of the 6 players for the session, the guys had discussed beforehand about wanting to have a slower kind of intro, a slower session, and have a bit more discussion to kind of figure out where these different characters are coming from, because so far they've kind of gone from one encounter to the next. They've just been kind of fighting their way out of situations. They haven't really had time to stop and think, and I think they wanted to establish kind of where their individual characters are coming from, and why would they work together. What do they want, essentially, which from an acting perspective, figuring out what your character wants is one of the most important things. So certainly something worthwhile doing. So we had a bit of that. They had a bit of a slower start. Have a bit of a chat, establish more of lore in the world, a few teasers about future events, about where their characters are coming from, and a special mention, I should say, to Bart playing Brucon, because I think he really had a moment to shine in session 10 by talking more about the balance. Now it's. The balance is basically another religion that the monks of the Barkfang Monastery follow, of which Brucon is a part of. So he believes in the balance, and the balance is essentially, he described it perfectly without completely realizing it. It's the balance between the light and the dark. So good and evil, kind of got that yin yang idea in mind. And he explained it as a seesaw, and that is very much how it works. So you want to keep the balance between good and evil. You don't want one being far higher than the other one. So it was really nice just to see him do that explanation, and then learn more, for me as a DM as well, learn more about where Brucon's coming from and how his mannerisms and how he operates. So that was really nice to see that, and he basically he prattles on more than I thought he would have. I thought that Brucon might be more direct, but actually he does like to talk when he gets the opportunity, and come up with metaphors and things like that. And certainly going forward, if I have to role play as Brucon because Bart isn't there, I will certainly keep that in mind. I think that'd be good fun. But also, session 10 was now a kind of a branching off point, because it meant that the players can start on this little adventure down into the rat caves. But also, I wanted to, because the main thrust still is tracking down Lady Helene Grenforth, we want to keep the momentum with that as well. And so it was a perfect opportunity to then grab the NPCs, to grab Teenan and Turin, and kind of let them just carry on looking for her and kind of drift off from the group so that they can meet up later. It makes sense because, for one thing, it means that I've got 2 less NPCs to manage, but also it means it gives the players a touching off point, the opposite of a touching point touching off points, a place to latch onto, people to latch onto when they progress further and go towards Hilberg, which seems to be the next village. And what I like to call the starter village. Session 10, haven't got to the starter village yet. Who knew? Um, so by having them branch off, it means that now we can have just the players doing it. I don't have to have these NPCs in kind of clogging up fights and taking over some of the limelight. Now we can have the players themselves interacting with each other, and just kind of over the next few sessions, what I anticipate seeing is just seeing the group kind of mold itself together into a team, and see how, because the process has started, but now as it's just them, they can really focus on each other and how they work together and try and get all their goals to align. So that'll be the next thing, I think, over the next few sessions. And as they've entered the rat caves, so far they've found some interesting and foul experiments. They found not only giant rats, but horrible mutated spider rats. So essentially, think giant spider, but with a rat's head. Pretty gross, and proved pretty difficult for the party to overcome. There's more of that to follow, as they teased at the end of session 10 and said there's more coming. And the other major thing that they found in the tunnel so far is Malar found a leather-bound book and a yellow potion, a vial full of yellow liquid. And hopefully they will find out, because it would be quite a useful thing for them, what that potion actually is. And well, I won't say what it is on here, because we may well find out in the next session on Monday. But if DK is watching, or any of the other players, the clue as to what this yellow liquid is in the journal that was next to it. It says exactly what it is. So give it a read, because it's going to be really useful, possibly in the next encounter. So we've got that to look forward to next time. And there was one last plot hook that was also thrown into session 10, and that was unexpectedly, I didn't see this happening, but after kind of establishing a bit more background and a bit more history to Malar with the use of the Iskun tea, which Jackman Winklebottom had mentioned, that smelled a bit like home, because Malar, his Loxodon clan had actually come from Isk, and then he travelled to Burikrin later on as part of his backstory. So it's nice to put that in there, but I think that prompted DK to then go, we've got these Iskin pentacles, and he just kind of didn't know what to do with them, so he planted them on bar, like, what do I want to do with these? And that one last plot hook, again for Hilberg, so that's where Tienan and Taran are going. There's a general store in Hilberg, which may well offer trade or a bureau de change of the Iskin pentacles. So just lay that in there as well. Because obviously not everywhere will take all different kinds of currencies. If you go to your local pub, they're probably not going to take euros. If you're in Britain, they're probably not going to take euros if you're paying, because the currency here is pounds. Just makes sense. So next time, it's on Monday at 6 p.m. here on the channel. We'll be picking up exactly where we left off in the rat caves, and there are such rats to look forward to as the rat bear pig, dragon rats, and exploding rats. Yeah, you heard it. So look forward to all of those things. Come and join us Monday, 6 p.m. here on the channel. Until then, thank you for watching and stay safe.